Quick announcement, I am now on Spotify, iHeartRadio, Google Podcasts, and Apple Podcasts. So if you are currently listening on YouTube and you prefer maybe using one of those other platforms, you can definitely do that. Just search manic.mercurian. You should be able to find me pretty easily that way. Welcome to your astrological forecast for the week of Monday, March 6th through Sunday, March 12th, 2023. How's everybody doing? I feel like things are intensifying again. This is something I can kind of feel intuitively, I think. You can feel that there is something kind of going on. The plot is thickening, and I think we're very close to a sort of tipping point of sorts. I can also see this in the astrology. We have some major stuff that's going to happen this month and specifically this week as well. First, let's talk about what happened just last week. So last week we had basically this kind of weird triple conjunction in Aries between Venus, Chiron, and Jupiter. I talked a lot about that. That is still affecting us this week, and we'll actually get that exact conjunction between Jupiter and Chiron. This is pretty special and important because we rarely have such outer planetary conjunctions. Jupiter, is very slow. Chiron is even slower. So this type of conjunction is very rare, very pivotal, and it sort of marks an ending and a beginning, between different chapters, between different eras. So that is something interesting we can kind of dissect later in this forecast. Besides that, last week we also had Mercury enter Pisces. That's not nearly as pivotal or profound. Happens every year. Mercury is cruising right now. It's only going to spend, I believe it's 16 or 17 days in Pisces. So this is I would say an overall challenging transit. Definitely not the end of the world by any means. But with Mercury and Pisces, things can be a little bit more confused or more muddled. However, we can also be more open to strange or unusual information that we might otherwise overlook or not be open to. So there are some pros and cons of that, but that is potentially a challenging transit to go through. But like I said, this will be really quick. Okay, what's happening this week though? So there's a lot going on this week. We have a full moon happening at 16 degrees Pisces, so we'll talk a lot about that. The full moon's at 16 degrees Virgo. I'm so sorry. Opposing the sun at 16 degrees Pisces. So basically it's the opposition between Pisces and Virgo. The spotlight is kind of shown on the Virgo full moon for this, so I'll save my analysis for the day-by-day forecast for that day. Besides the full moon, though, it's pretty crazy. Usually a full moon would be the biggest kind of highlight of the week, but that is not even true this week. We have Saturn finally leaving Aquarius, which it entered in December 2020, I believe. It's leaving Aquarius and entering Pisces. So this only happens about 2.5 years or so when Saturn leaves one sign and enters another. This is very pivotal for sure. This is by far the most important or profound event that's happening astrologically this week, in my opinion. A 2.5 year transit that really does mark a kind of era of sorts. With Saturn and Aquarius the last 2.5 years or so, we've had a lot of constriction, and we've had to be very serious and become stronger, especially in areas related to groups of people, technology, the spreading of information. All of these things have been challenged, and those are of course what Aquarius represents. So now, when we have Saturn entering Pisces, this is going to be very different. For the last 5 years or so, Saturn has been in domicile in Capricorn and then Aquarius. Now, once it enters Pisces, it's a completely different story. I use the planetary joys and I apply them to the signs. Saturn is in joy in the 12th house. 12th house does have some parallels or connections to Pisces, and so I would go as far as to say Saturn is in joy in Pisces. This means that this can be a somewhat fun placement to experience. I think this is, generally speaking, the easiest sign for Saturn to be in. There are still definitely challenges. There are always challenges and responsibilities that we face with any Saturn transit. But I think these are the easiest to embrace when Saturn is in Pisces, because Saturn typically is all about control and structure. It pushes us to be better, to be strong, wise, mature. It gives us tasks which are very difficult, but which are straightforward and clear. When Saturn is in Pisces, it acts very different. It's almost a little bit more sleepy, more soft. That typical iron fist of sorts kind of loosens up and becomes softer. So there's almost a lack of structure. So on the one hand, that can be good news. That can be a relief. We don't have to be so serious or so disciplined. However, on the other hand, it can be a challenge, if not a disaster in itself, losing that structure. Structure is necessary for a foundation to build on. And so, what happens when we go from having a very strong Saturn in Capricorn and Aquarius, lots of structure. We've had lots of rules and regulations over the last 5 years or so, lots of top-down power and control. Once we have Saturn entering Pisces, the story becomes very different. A lot of that control, structure, power is not only loosened, but maybe even completely lost. And so you have this kind of collapse of the system, so to speak. So I don't know exactly how severe that collapse will be, but I do think there's going to be, for better or for worse, a loosening of the system, if you will. So anyway, that's kind of my take on Saturn in Pisces. That really deserves its own video, but to sum it up, that is how I see this. Also, real quick, I talked about how Saturn challenges the themes of whatever sign it's in. Pisces has a lot to do with spirituality, probably more so than any other sign. So different, spiritual mannerisms, lifestyles, beliefs may all be challenged, especially the next 2.5 years or so. Okay, but besides Saturn going into Pisces, I already mentioned Jupiter conjunct Chiron. That's a big deal. And on a more minor kind of light note, the moon will be waxing, meaning gaining light from Leo or Virgo, to the full moon in Virgo. And then from there, it will be waning, losing light through Scorpio for this week. Okay, so without getting too caught up in these overall kind of long-term trends, let's go into the day-by-day forecast and talk about what I think might be most likely for you to experience this week here. Okay, so for Monday, March 6th, the moon will be in Virgo basically all day. In the Eastern Standard Time Zone, moon enters Virgo right around midnight, so right around the beginning of the day, Sunday night going into Monday morning. It's almost dead on at midnight that the moon enters Virgo. So depending on your time zone, moon may enter Virgo either Sunday or Monday. But for the purpose of this video, I'll just say moon will basically be in Virgo all day Monday. So we're already in the midst of this full moon. We will not have the exact full moon aspect on Monday, but we're basically experiencing already. The moon will appear very full in the sky. And, you can already be experiencing the themes of this opposition between the moon and the sun, because they are, stepping into, within orb of this aspect. So, this is intense. We're already in the full moon energy. So there's this kind of electric or intense energy in the air when we are so close to a full moon. Specifically, like I mentioned in the intro, this is lighting up the Virgo-Pisces axis. So this axis has everything to do with integration, processing things. Both Virgo and Pisces, in their own ways, represent endings. Virgo ends not only summer, but it also ends the whole first half of the zodiac. And Pisces ends the entire zodiac, as well as the season of winter. So both these signs have the task of kind of concluding, ruminating, pondering, in order to not only process the events that have already taken place, but basically this whole process is done in order to make room for and allude to the next cycle, the next beginning that will come with the next phase, if that makes sense. So I always say with basically with any kind of opposition between Virgo and Pisces, integrate, do things that are calming, relaxing. Moon is in Virgo, so some of that can be productive, organizing, anything having to do with cooking, gardening, doing something with your hands like a craft, or reading, writing, processing information. All of these activities can help us to kind of slow down and, be in our bodies, be grounded. And this is imperative for your ability to not only to maintain your emotional and mental health, but also to build your intuition and your psychic abilities as well. So that's what my advice would be. But going back to the basics here, this is a full moon. We may feel kind of wound up. We're also mixing two mutable signs here. So whenever that happens, things tend to be very scattered. The energies are coming at you from many different directions. There may be many different like small situations kind of happening and popping up. The reason being is because each mutable sign, Pisces, Gemini, Virgo, Sagittarius, each one has so much going on with it in itself. Each one has so many different sides. It's always changing. It can look this way sometimes and it can look that way other times. These are complex signs that, they're multifaceted. So when you combine not just one but multiple mutable signs together, in this case Moon and Virgo with Sun and Pisces and our other Pisces planets as well, you're mixing a lot together. Virgo is complicated, Pisces is complicated. They both have different sides. Now you're mixing both of them together. Things can be very scattered, very confusing, very nuanced, very unpredictable, especially considering we're so close to this full moon aspect. Besides the moon entering Virgo, we do have kind of one aspect for Monday, so that would be Sun sextiling Uranus. Sun at 15 degrees Pisces, making a waning sextile to Uranus at 15 degrees Taurus. So this is really great, especially for bringing in kind of intuitive flashes or enlightenment. That's kind of what tends to happen with Uranus aspects, and Uranus is aspecting Sun, which is in Pisces. So that really tells me that this is an opportunity for having informational downloads or kind of psychic flashes, streaks of intuition, or it could just be realizing things, coming across information that may be very pivotal for you. Seeing things in a different way. That's what Uranus is all about. It's not necessarily always our physical environments that are changing so dramatically when we have a Uranus aspect. Most of the time it comes from within ourselves. It's our perception that's changing. It's our awareness. So that is exciting. It can bring a little bit of tumultuous change and more unpredictability, but this is a sextile. Sextiles are harmonious aspects, and Uranus is in Taurus, Sun is in Pisces. These energies blend together very well, very beautifully. They're both yin energies. So again, they're both coming back to the intuition, looking within yourself for clarity or for gaining awareness. So all in all, I think it's a really kind of strange Monday for sure. On the one hand, we're feeling very active, very wound up, but on the other hand, all the energies are kind of telling us to go within, slow down, process things. So it may be difficult to kind of juggle all of that on Monday, but that's kind of what I see in a nutshell. Next, going to Tuesday, March 7th, Moon continues through Virgo, and so on Tuesday we get both of the main events of the week. We have not only the full moon at 16 degrees Virgo, we also have Saturn entering Pisces. So by now I've already kind of outlined these, but I'm going to flesh these out just a little bit more for you. So first, let's look at the full moon here. Like I mentioned, Virgo, the full moon is at 16 degrees Virgo. It doesn't really aspect a whole lot. There is, you could say there's quincunxes with Aries, these Aries planets. I don't usually cover quincunxes in these forecasts just because they are, a more minor aspect. But I think what's more significant than that is there is kind of a loose T-square between the sun and moon, which are, of course, opposing. But both of them are squaring Mars, which is in Gemini. So I think that adds a little bit of intensity. Full moons are already intense energies. I think we're all familiar with that by now. Even people that aren't really into astrology can recognize that, things tend to really kind of happen on full moons, and there's a full range there. Moon is a neutral energy. It's neither a malefic nor a benefic. So there can be really great stuff happening and not so great stuff happening as well. There's a lot of drama. There's a lot of chaos. There's just more activity in general for under full moons. But now when you add in this kind of loose T-square with Mars adds more intense energy as well. Plus you're adding in another mutable sign, and like I was just talking about, the more mutable signs you add in together, that are squaring each other like this, the more just scattered and frenetic it becomes. And so really the test is being adaptable, among other things. I already kind of outlined how we must kind of integrate, process things, be open to change. That's what all the mutable signs tell us. The mutable signs as well also are all about learning, but in different ways. Virgo, of course, learns in a kind of, academic, very literal type of way, reading, writing, analyzing, things like that. Pisces is more learning emotionally, spiritually, intuitively. And then, we can also add in Mars and Gemini, which is learning a little bit more like Virgo, expanding knowledge through maybe talking, socializing, observing, things of that nature. Also reading and writing, things like that as well. But all these energies have to do with self-improvement, changing, being open to newness, expanding yourself through some kind of experience, increasing your knowledge, increasing your awareness, things of that nature. So for more stubborn or consistent personalities, this will be very difficult. If you are more open to change and open to newness, then this won't be nearly as difficult. However, if you do have any kind of mutable placements, especially let's say about halfway through Pisces, Gemini, Virgo, or Sagittarius, specifically right around 16 degrees, since that's where this full moon will happen. Although you may be open to change, since you are, you have that mutable placement, this will be especially extreme for you because you will be involved in this kind of T-squared, let's call it. And for example, if you have a placement between, let's say, 16 and 21 degrees Sagittarius, this means that your placement will complete a grand mutable cross. So basically, anyone with these mutable placements, you will be in the spotlight. Things are about you. The change is going on with you. You're the lucky person that has to do, it's your life that's changing very dramatically right now. But for the rest of us as well, for all of us, we will experience this. A lot of change, a lot of frenetic energy, scatteredness. We may be more prone to burnout because we may be very busy under this type of energy. But again, like I said, slow down, relax when it's appropriate, when you can. Do the things that allow you to integrate. I really think we all have some kind of activity, hobby, practice that we do to slow down and kind of be out of our mind, if that makes sense. Or not out of our mind, but to get in the zone, or whatever you call it. When you're golfing and you do that perfect swing where you're not even thinking about it, you're just kind of doing it. Or if you're swimming or whatever, I think everyone has something that they do to kind of relax the mind and almost meditate in a way. So do that, even if it's just for 5 minutes today. Do something like that. That's what my advice would be. Okay, and then besides that, of course, the big event, Saturn entering Pisces. So Saturn will be in Pisces for the next almost 3 years, really. Saturn will enter Aries in 2026. So we're entering this kind of this chapter of a more Piscean era. For the first time in over 2 years, we don't have any planets in Aquarius at all. So we're moving into a time that may be more emotional, more sensitive, more, I want to say more crisis oriented, just because I do think all the water signs are objectively more difficult, especially for outer planets to go through, because they correspond to endings. And immense change, and change is of course difficult for us. When we have a planet like Saturn going through Pisces, yes, there are easy components of that. Maybe a loosening of the structure can definitely have its benefits, but on the other hand, this represents an ending and a lack of structure, which can also be very difficult and chaotic for sure. So anyway, I do think I need to do a video on Saturn entering Pisces, as well as Pluto entering Aquarius, which it's going to do this month as well. Not to get ahead of myself, but yeah, Tuesday. This is such an outer planet that it's not like you'll necessarily feel a dramatic difference on Tuesday the 2nd that Saturn technically enters Pisces. This is a slow, gradual process. In some ways, even before this date, we've already been experiencing themes that are representative of Saturn in Pisces, if that makes sense. It's kind of like, you can think of it as going from season to season. The weather changes, it goes back and forth. We can sense that fall is coming before it actually begins, or spring is coming before it technically begins. It's not always so clear that it's winter one day and spring the next day. These things kind of fade in and out. And there is kind of a blurriness there. Cusps are exact for sure, but they're also a little bit blurry, if that makes sense. I might upset some people because I know cusps are very controversial astrologically, but I don't want to go down that whole rabbit hole. I'm just saying this is a long-term transit. We're really entering kind of a new era, I guess, leaving 2.5 year chapter behind and entering a new one that will be more focused on emotion, spirituality, and a loosening of the structure. Okay, so for Wednesday, March 8th, Moon continues on through Virgo, and then right around noon Eastern Standard Time, it actually does enter Libra. So I do think this is nice. Things can be maybe a little bit more relaxed now the moon is waning. It will still appear very full at this point, but it's beginning to lose its light. And so with that, it's basically an analogy. So, with the moon losing light, things can become a little bit more relaxed, maybe. Especially with Moon in Libra. If Moon it represents our emotions and our minds, Moon being in Libra means that we have the highest propensity to think before we act, and move in maybe kind of a slow, thorough way. So Moon in Libra tends to be a very relaxed, peaceful transit. Of course, it depends on your chart. Where does this fall in your chart? How does that look? We all have different individual experiences, but overall, Moon in Libra, especially combining that with Sun in Pisces, these are very kind of receptive energies. They're focused on, they're a little bit more passive in nature, I think. So that's why I do think things can be a little bit more peaceful. Plus, whenever you have whenever you have the moon leave the sign that it was just full in, I do think that's indicative of, moving away from the full moon, coming off of that high, kind of gently kind of floating off of that intensity just a little bit. So I do think that's good. Plus, in its most basic form, Libra is a social sign. So Moon in Libra indicates that we're maybe a little bit more focused on other people, wanting that, kind of good interactions, good conversations, things of that nature for Wednesday. Okay, going right along to Thursday, March 9th. Moon continues through Libra, and it does make some aspects. Moon will be opposing these three bodies in Aries now. So you can see noon Eastern Standard Time, Moon opposes Jupiter. And then shortly after that, it will oppose Chiron. And later in the day, very late Thursday, maybe early Friday, depending on your time zone, Moon will oppose Venus. So the reason why I bring this up is because, I talked in last week's forecast about how this triple conjunction in Aries was so bizarre and kind of profound, and I think very meaningful. It has faded into the background a little bit this week, but as the moon goes through Libra and opposes those planets one by one, it basically brings the attention back to that energy, to that transit. So if you listen to my forecast, you probably heard me talk about Chiron and Aries. We've all been a little bit sensitive since 2018. That's where you get, cancel culture and a lot of protests as well. Um, I'm sorry, I have more company today with these cats, but yeah, there's been that kind of sensitivity in bringing up, the past, bringing up sensitive subjects. And with Jupiter and Venus there, that's really expanded that type of energy, but it's also brought, I think, not only expansion but also some peaceful energies, maybe some resolution to certain topics. But now, as the moon opposes these energies, I think it brings up a dichotomy. It allows us to kind of see outside the box. Moon in Libra is not. It's not on the same page of being so emotional and so vocal about ourselves and our past and our traumas. Moon in Libra doesn't so much want that. It wants diplomacy. It wants cooperation. It wants, I don't know, rest. It wants to be more observant, more thorough, not so emotional, not so intense. So, it kind of brings up this dichotomy. Which way do you want to go? You can choose how to approach this, I guess, if that makes sense. So I did think that was kind of interesting. Just wanted to point that out real quick. Okay, going to Friday, March 10th, moon, late in the day, Eastern Standard Time, moon will leave Libra and enter Scorpio. So, of course, that's a very different vibe. Moon will be still in Libra most of the day, but evening, Eastern Standard Time, moon will be in Scorpio. So, very different. Scorpio is much more intense, much more of a heavy energy compared to Libra, and it's very emotional since it's a water sign. But this actually works out pretty well since Sun is in Pisces, which of course is another water sign. So Moon will gradually begin to step into more of a trine aspect with the Sun. So Sun in a water sign, Moon in a water sign, lots of emotion, lots of intuition, creativity, lots of going within, lots of change, lots of endings. But this is a very harmonious aspect. When the Sun and the Moon begin to trine one another, it's harmonious. It's a strong vibe. It's a good mood for most people, I would say. Excuse me. Other than that, for Friday, Mercury does bring us a couple different aspects, or you could call it one aspect. So Mercury will be at 14 degrees Pisces. It will sextile both Jupiter and Chiron almost simultaneously, because at this point they are basically conjunct. Jupiter and Chiron are. So again, we have. I'm so sorry. I just realized this isn't a sextile; it's a semi-sextile. So usually I wouldn't cover semi-sextiles, but since I already brought it up, I could really briefly cover it. So in case you're not familiar, sextiles are harmonious, but this is not a sextile; it's a semi-sextile. This basically means that these two energies are 30 degrees apart. So Mercury at 14 degrees Pisces, Chiron and Jupiter at 14 degrees Aries. They're exactly one sign apart. They're 30 degrees apart. So when you have energies that are exactly one sign apart, I almost think of them as being sibling energies, because, they are pretty close to each other in the zodiac. They are in signs that have to do with the same season, sort of. So Pisces and Aries, late winter, early spring, it's the same context, it's the same environment, sort of. Both have to do with, soulfulness and spirit. Both are clustered around this, ending and this new beginning. So both are very emotional, very raw. They actually have a lot in common. But just like siblings, even though they come from the same environment, they are dramatically different as well. So it can be very dysfunctional, and you can get this off and on quality to it. So it can be kind of harmonious for a little bit and then suddenly very dysfunctional. Again, just like I think siblings can be from time to time. So anyway, that's kind of what the semi-sextile aspect is in general. So applying that to these planets, Mercury in Pisces is showing, the intellectual focus is on spirituality and emotion. Things don't have to be so objectively correct. We can look to our truth, so to speak, be a little bit more subjective and more emotional. But this doesn't always fit with Chiron and Jupiter in Aries, which are much more decisive and confident and focused on personal wounds. So they're both subjective, both of these placements. But one has to do much more with endings and kind of just drifting around and thinking and contemplating. And the other energy, Chiron and Jupiter in Aries, is much more active. It knows what it wants. It's black and white, and it's very intense, and it's all about a new beginning. So that's where this is dysfunctional. These do kind of clash. The reason why I don't usually talk about this type of thing, though, is because semi-sextiles are minor aspects. They're not nearly as potent as, the aspects I tend to talk about. So if you have placements that form strong aspects with either Mercury or Chiron and Jupiter, you'll know what I'm saying to be true. You'll really experience this. But for most of us that don't have placements here, this will be kind of just background noise, if that makes sense. So I'm going to move on. Let's go to Saturday, March 11th here. Okay, so Moon continues through Scorpio. It's getting closer to that trine aspect I mentioned with the Sun. It's not there yet, but we're stepping into those kind of good vibes. It's very harmonious. Yes, there can be that kind of darkness, that cynicism, that intensity, since Moon is in Scorpio. But because it's backed up by Sun in Pisces, and it's stepping into this really nice waning trine aspect, that's where you do get that stability, that harmony. And I think it's actually very interesting when you have Sun and Moon both in different water signs, because the energy is not so emotionally out of control as it sometimes is when you just have one planet in a water sign. Because they trine together, they are supporting each other, they're strong, we may experience high amounts of emotion, but it's in a very stable type of way, if that makes sense. And that's where, when we combine multiple water placements like this, Sun in Pisces, Moon in Scorpio, in this case, the focus can actually become very almost intellectual, very, kind of detached, really. And that's where, you get these themes and energies that are almost unlike, what we would typically expect from a water sign. And I'm not sure why exactly, but I think it has something to do with how the water signs are also intuitive, and so they can become very wise, especially when you add a bunch of water signs together, a bunch of water placements together. So long story short, Sun in Pisces, Moon in Scorpio, delve within yourself. Water signs, like I mentioned, do have to do sometimes with endings and sometimes rest periods. That's where these things have to do with escapism sometimes, but that could even just be sleep, resting, dreaming, things of that nature, meditating, things like that, or being creative, being artistic, getting lost in music, things like of that nature. Okay, besides that, for Saturday we do have Venus and Mars making an aspect. So Venus at 23 degrees Aries sextiles Mars at 23 degrees Gemini. And if you've listened to my past forecasts, you know that I love Venus-Mars aspects, especially when it's like a harmonious aspect like this. Sun and Mars are sextiling, so this means that Venus and Mars. This means that Venus and Mars are in energies that are different enough that they can each bring something kind of unique to the table, but they're in energies that are similar enough that it's an easy aspect to experience. So Venus is in Aries. It's showing that we're desiring sovereignty right now, individuality. We're desiring freedom to be independent and kind of move around freely. And we're also desiring things that are new or maybe kind of flashy or intense. Mars is in Gemini, showing that we are a little bit more controversial, debating, a little bit competitive when it comes to learning, information, things of that nature. And Mars has been there since October of last year, so this is something we've been experiencing for a while. But when they come together like this in this sextile, just like the name sextile, it has the word sex in it. It can sound sexual. When you have a sextile between Venus and Mars, which both in their own way have to do with desire, attraction, our wants, our desires, it does become very, very much about pleasure and desire, for sure. Especially considering this particular sextile, Venus and Mars are both in signs that are very kind of youthful and very energetic, very spontaneous, very outgoing. Both want a lot of room to play around and experiment. So I do think there can be, maybe some very interesting attraction going on, flirtation for sure. Again, of course, especially if you have placements around 23 degrees Aries or Gemini, you will be very attractive right now, and you may be indulging in some pleasures. You may be very attracted to others at this time as well. Maybe, having some kind of flirtatious experience of your own, or romantic experience, maybe sexual. But for the rest of us as well, we can experience this to an extent as well. Like I always say, look to where this falls in your chart to see how you will experience this. For example, let's say Mars is in your 10th house. This won't be so much about flirtation. It'll be more about achieving something with your career or with your kind of profile, being ambitious in that regard and having some kind of positive experience that way, things of that nature. So this will be a little bit different for everyone, just like every aspect I talk about. Okay, and then lastly, let's go to Sunday, March 12th. So Moon is still in Scorpio. It doesn't reach Sagittarius by the end of the weekend, so we'll leave that for Monday. But we do get that exact trine. You can see here, looks like just before noon Eastern Standard Time. Let me go back an hour. Or it looks like right around noon Eastern Standard Time, actually. We get that exact trine between Sun at 21 degrees Pisces, Moon at 21 degrees Scorpio. I think not a lot of people talk about the Moon trining the Sun, but this is a very visceral, very tangible aspect to experience. Again, you have those good, solid vibes, so to speak. Kind of an overused phrase, but it's true, though. It's good vibes today. Good mood collectively, and again, specifically focused on creativity, spirituality, intuition, things of that nature, and emotion, being, indulging in experiences that are maybe very emotional today as well. We do have a couple different aspects. So Venus sextiles Neptune today. That's not correct. That's a semi-sextile as well. We already talked about semi-sextiles, so I'm going to skip that for now. But we also have Jupiter conjoining Chiron today, so that is a big deal because these energies are, much slower in nature. Jupiter and Chiron are conjunct at 14 degrees Aries, and I did bring this up in the last forecast because it was so close, and because Venus was involved in this, what was then a triple conjunction. And I talked about how it's hard to say how this would go. Jupiter is typically an energy of abundance. It's a very easy energy to connect with. It is harmonious and pleasurable. It brings us a lot of, really good things, easy times, good times. So one could say that Jupiter conjoining Chiron would bring some relief to this, how do I put it? To this sensitivity and intensity that we've had since 2018. Being so easily triggered, being so offended, being, wanting justice, wanting to be understood, and being very passionate about these things. I think there has been, a lot of progress in these areas for sure, but there's also been further destruction and further trauma that comes from the intensity of those demands and how we have gone about them, if that makes sense. So Jupiter coming here to this area, it could bring some much needed justice, some understanding, some ease. It kind of soothes things in this area. On the other hand, though, I would say the one main downside to Jupiter, although it is mostly beneficial and easy, it is about expansion. So sometimes it can blow things up, make them bigger, and that may not always be so desirable for us. So this could really dramatize something that has already been very dramatic. The cancel culture, I don't want to get too into it, but all of that, being triggered, it could just expand even further. And although these two different ways to interpret this aspect are very different, I think both will be true each in their own way. In some ways, there may be kind of a remedy to this this upset energy that we've had since 2018. But in other ways, this may just get expanded even further. I think both will be true. All in all, for the weekend, I don't know. It looks interesting. Like I said, we're in very interesting times right now, and I think things are heating up again. But for the weekend, it really depends. I would say I would give you a little bit of homework and say, where do the water signs fall in your chart? Like I said, Sun in Pisces, Moon in Scorpio. I think although there is a lot going on in Aries, I think overall the focus is still on these water signs, Pisces and Scorpio. So where do they fall in your chart? If you have a lot of planets in either or both of those signs, this weekend's going to be all about you. It's going to be about your self-empowerment, really feeling yourself doing what you want to do this weekend, focusing on your needs and wants. But for the rest of us, where do these water signs fall in your chart? How do you experience water signs? Water signs, I think, collectively are endings usually, but depending on how they fall in your chart, they could be more like beginnings, or it could be more of a middle phase for you. It really just depends. So, but for all of us, it's gonna be an emotional weekend. Good vibes for sure, very strong vibes, but lots of vibes nonetheless. Okay, so that's what I have for you for this week. I really hope everybody has a good week here. Stay tuned next week. There's third quarter moon in Sagittarius at 24 degrees. Venus will enter Taurus, and Mercury will also change signs and enter Aries. So I think this will be collectively definitely some good news, because Venus and Taurus and Mercury and Aries, these energies are easier to experience than what we did have. Venus was just in detriment in Aries, Mercury was in detriment and fall in Pisces. So now both of those enter signs that they're much more comfortable in, with Venus in domicile in Taurus, and in my opinion, Mercury in joy in Aries. So basically, things are going to lighten up a little bit next week. If this week has been really intense, which I think it might be, just hang in there till next week. I do think things are going to be a little bit easier. However, things are going to get real intense and interesting later in the month and later in the year. Later this month we have, like I mentioned, Pluto entering Aquarius. That's a really big deal. Also, you can kind of see that I shouldn't say all, most of the planets are increasingly moving to one part of the chart. They're all going to pretty much line up in Aries and Taurus later this spring. So anyway, take care of yourselves, guys. Thank you for listening, and I will talk to you in the next forecast.